Hello, and welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so glad you're joining us. My name is Kim Menninger, and as a women's leadership coach and a lifelong sufferer of imposter syndrome, this topic is really important to me. I have heard so many imposter syndrome stories from the women around me. The crippling self-doubt, the feelings of being a fraud, the fear of speaking up, the disconnect from others. I've also heard the inspiring ways in which women have managed these feelings, the ways in which they've stood up to self-doubt, sought out support, and come through on the other side. I started this podcast because I want to share these stories with you. Too many of us suffer in silence. We feel alone and ashamed of our feelings, which makes them even more powerful. I wanted to create a space where women could share their experiences and release the burden of what we often carry around as a deep, dark secret. I also wanted a place where everyone could hear from others and recognize, hey, I'm not alone. Imposter syndrome is a real thing, and there are steps that I can take to rise above it. I hope that as you listen, you'll find support and comfort in what you hear. And if you're feeling brave and motivated to do so, I hope you'll someday share your story with us. So welcome, Preeti. I am so excited to have you here today. Would you start by just briefly telling us about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Kim. My name is Preeti Adhikary. Currently, I'm the VP of Marketing at Fuse Machines, which is an AI company based in New York City. I'm actually transitioning out since I'm going to school this fall.
Wonderful. And you have an interesting background, having lived in a lot of different places.
Right.
If you're comfortable sharing that, would you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Oh my God, sure. So I'm originally from Nepal. I studied there till high school. And then I came to the US for my undergrad, went to Tennessee, amazing experience, but very, culturally very different. And then I went back and worked for a few years. For my MBA, I actually went to Canada, Vancouver. Then I went to Singapore to finish my MBA as part of the exchange program, and I worked there for 5 years. And then I went back to Nepal for like 8-9 months. And then I've been in the US since 2015. So it's been all over.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I want to come back to that as we move through this conversation. But before we do that, I want to ask you, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? How do you think about this? Has it affected you at all as you've been advancing your career?
Sure. So for me, imposter syndrome means that you feel like you're not good enough, or at times you feel like you're not good at all, right? It's this kind of self-doubt where you wonder if you're successful just because you were lucky or you made the right choice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And have you experienced that throughout your own career?
Yes, I think it's something that all of us face, especially women, at different parts of our career and professional lives. And for me, it's been there have been few instances. Like for example, in my current job, I work with a lot of technical people, and I'm not technical, right? There are people that have engineering degrees, that have PhDs in machine learning. And for me, like my domain expertise is way, way lower than that. And I accept that, which meant that if I'm sitting around and brainstorming about something, I always have this doubt that, am I sounding dumb or something like that? Add to that the fact that I don't have, a degree in marketing, and I am a marketer. I'm a marketer sort of by accident and now by choice, which means I have sort of like a double imposter syndrome, right? I'm constantly at least in the beginning, I would constantly judge myself and, really think about what I was saying, or, having all these doubts.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it makes perfect sense what you're describing when you're in an environment surrounded by people who you look at and think, wow, they know so much more than I do.
Right. Exactly.
So how do you handle that? Because you've been with your company, you mentioned, for about 2.5 years now, right? So you've obviously stuck with it. You didn't,
right.
You didn't curl up into a ball and decide this is not going to work. Are you aware when this is happening, and are there specific things that you do to get through it?
Right. So, I actually joined Fuse Machines, I think about 3.5 years. I joined in an operations role. And then for marketing, my CEO, he needed somebody in marketing, and he asked, and, even though I didn't know a lot about marketing, I wanted to give it a shot, right? I think life is all about taking these risks and not really thinking too much sometimes. So I took it, and in terms of, imposter syndrome, obviously it happens, but over time you also know how to sort of deal with it, or even leverage it, right? Even if we have a particular degree or anything like that, we learn a lot on the job, right? Mm-hmm. So you even learn how to sort of tune yourself to the surrounding. You observe a lot, you see what other people bring, and then what value you can bring. So one good way for me to deal with all of this has been to really understand. And now I strongly believe that I probably won't be the smartest person in the room, but I'm going to be the most hardworking, right? And hard work trumps a lot of things in life, and it actually it enables you to break barriers and break free.
You're right. I think that's interesting too, because a lot of the conversations I've been having lately have emphasized or included a discussion about the hidden benefit of imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And this sense, and that's something that we don't typically think about, because imposter syndrome can be very painful, as we all know.
Right.
There is this hidden silver lining that you're describing too, of you may not, like you said, be the smartest person in the room, and that's a very subjective term in and of itself.
Right.
You may not have the highest degree, or you
right exactly
an expertise.
Right.
But if you really truly saw yourself as the smartest person in the room, you'd show up very differently, right? You may not be as
right. And when I say the smartest person, I don't mean like I'm sort of underestimating me. I'm saying in terms of, like you said, right, the degree or the years of experience and so on, right? The sort of these numbers that we look at, not in terms of real intelligence, but maybe just in terms of these visible things, in terms of the numbers, right?
Right, the credentials.
Right, exactly, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like you have made a commitment to yourself to continue to take the kinds of risks that are important to you, and to work really hard to be successful in those endeavors, despite whatever lack of experience you might have going into it.
Right. And I think also, just in terms of a benefit, so to speak, of, the syndrome, is that it actually makes us humble, right? It actually makes us, I would, any given day, I would rather be, humble than overconfident, right? Even overconfident actually is, and it's irrespective of your gender or your title and so on, it actually clouds your judgment in so many ways, right? I'd rather think in terms of, okay, I have to learn, I have to, really find my place. I mean, it actually gives you a very different mindset, and I feel like that's a more positive place to actually absorb a lot, and learn a lot and actually contribute a lot, right?
Yeah, you're so right. I think we probably see that every day in leaders around us, the ones who are truly curious, who recognize that they have something to learn from others, right? That they didn't walk into the room having all of the answers, are so much more effective, so much more inspirational. And if that's how we want to show up, that dose of humility that comes from imposter syndrome
Right.
you're describing is really important. It
Right.
does have this moderating effect of keeping us from feeling too comfortable or
Exactly. And I've actually seen that with a lot of, like you said, a lot of amazing leaders as well, right? I mean, they've had amazing roles, they've accomplished a lot, but when you actually interact with them, they're like, they treat you like they see you, right? They listen to you, and they're so humble, right? And actually that differentiates amazing leaders from just good ones, I mean, okay ones, right? I feel like I don't know how much imposter syndrome actually contributes to that humility, but I have a feeling it does. It just, in terms of a little bit, it actually keeps us in check, of our confidence.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I'm curious now, going back to your journey, because you have had this really unique opportunity to experience different cultures, to be at different stages of your own development in different
Right.
countries, right? Do you think culture plays a role in imposter syndrome? Or, how would you, reflecting back on your own experience, think about how imposters showed up differently, if at all, when you were in different places in the world?
Sure. I think culture does play such an important role, right? So, for example, just in terms of, for example, going to school, one visible difference was, and this was a cultural shock to me, because at least in Asia, you treat your teachers. I mean, they're obviously seniors, they know more, and you're used to saying sir, madam, and you treat them with respect, not just in terms of how you behave, but even your language, your tone is very different, right? So for me, like, a big change was coming to the US for my undergrad and calling your professors by their first name, right? We, like, it was just I mean, it sounds so subtle, so simple, but that actually it was so difficult for me to actually do that, right? And not just that, but even here, the way of teaching and learning is that you actually don't take anything for granted, right? If you're taught something, you question it. And that, again, is a different mindset, right? Because for us, it was like, okay, this is the way it is. Like, you never question that. It's, and here, like, student participation that's a big part of your grade, because you're expected to question things. You're expected to ask questions. You're expected to interact with the team, with your class, with your professors, right? But for us, it's not inherent, so to speak. So, and what I realized, as especially, and because English is not my first language, it actually adds complexity, because a lot of these internal dialogues, you're not even having them in English, right? Which means that culturally, you're sort of brought up in a way that you want to ask smart questions. You don't want to ask a question where somebody, the teacher or your peers, say, okay, that was dumb, right? You want to ask a question that actually contributes to the discussion. And I think it's just overthinking, right? For me, the learning, I really enjoyed my undergrad studies, and it actually changed my life. And simple things like not overthinking that. I mean, you're in a class to learn. It's almost like your right to ask questions, and help your own learning, right? Your job isn't to have this ongoing internal dialogue about, okay, is the question right? Is my, grammar correct? Like, unnecessary things. I think it just adds to the complexity. So, it does, culture does play a part in sort of, um, making us overthink things.
It's so fascinating. And I've had this conversation with a number of people too, as it relates to Eastern versus Western culture, or
right,
just the more, for lack of a better term, hierarchical approach,
right,
in Asian countries. And so because that's something that is likely socialized in you throughout your development, coming to a country where that is not the way we operate, like you're describing, right? This critical thinking, questioning, pushing back,
right,
can be such a break from how you habitually interact in the world.
Exactly.
How did you ease that transition? I mean, what was it like for you to suddenly find yourself in a place where it's not only acceptable to push back and have a different relationship with your elders, so to speak, but it was encouraged, and you're actually being graded based upon your ability to do that.
Right. I think it was liberating, but it wasn't, to adapt to that obviously wasn't so easy in the beginning, right? It does take, changing from, X to Y, it does take time, but it was interesting, and, for my MBA, for example, I studied first in Canada, and then I did like a few months in Singapore. And I could see, interesting sort of examples there as well, right? In Canada, obviously everybody worked really hard, they studied, but they had fun as well, right? Everybody was expected to be an all-rounder. Everybody sort of, even if we had really crazy schedules, everybody almost had time to be themselves, to follow their hobbies, to do a lot of different things. And in Singapore, it was interesting because a lot of people spent a lot of time in the library or just studying, right? Which meant that even the dialogue is very different. So, obviously, MBA students are a little more sort of open, and like there would be a lot of discussions, in either country, or, but it just in terms of the kind of information you bring in also differs, right? So in Canada it would be sort of, again, just like the US, a very sort of open and all-rounded sort of discussion where your views are not just driven by academic factors, right? You're looking at a lot of different things that are happening around you, your interests. I mean, it's a big combination. You are a combination of everything else that you do, right? But in Singapore, it was more, the focus was a lot academic. So obviously people participated in discussions and so on, but it was, driven more from, different things they've read in books and so on. It was not from other factors, so to speak.
It sounds like what you're describing is a partitioning between more of your personal life and the academic experience, whereas in Canada, it sounds like it was more holistic. Everything was
exactly. Right.
That's interesting. And I'm interested too in how that translates into the workplace, because now that you're out of an academic environment and you're in a workplace where you've got hierarchy to some extent, and that obviously depends on the structure of the company and how flat it is. But I've heard from others too about the transition that comes with pushing. I can't think of a better term for pushing back, but essentially, speaking up when it comes to management, right? To be able to challenge ideas, to share your own thoughts, which may be contradictory to somebody else's, to be more assertive in those kinds of environments. Did you find that the academic experience prepared you for the workplace, or were there any unique challenges that came up for you when you transitioned into more of the work environment as opposed to an academic environment?
Oh, sure. So I guess my answer is yes and no. Um, I feel like as we, become adults, so to speak, and, start our professional careers, a lot is, especially in the beginning, is just absorbing what's happening, how people are behaving around you, learning and so on, right? But what, with your life experiences, what it teaches you, and what it taught me at the end more than anything else is, that you have to be authentic, right? Whatever that means. You have to, and I think it does take a while for us to accept that who we are is unique and great and so on, right? So, just as an example, for me, because I, sort of was an accidental, I didn't really study marketing. And I didn't have a lot of domain expertise in artificial intelligence. In the beginning, it was, I would hesitate before sharing my ideas. If we talked about a marketing message, I would, listen more to others than contribute, right? And I think over time, you also learn that there's a lot of, we underestimate it, but there's, creativity and a different set of eyes, a different perspective is so important, right? Because one of the things, and, this is about diversity, right? And in diversity isn't just, where you're from and, your gender and so on, but your life experiences as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a company is richer when it's diverse, right? So if people and you could be diverse even if you're from the same city, but if you had different life experiences, so your perspective is unique, and you actually have a better discussion, a better dialogue when you have, people that have gone through interesting things, different things, and that actually shapes what we do, as a team, as a company.
Yeah, that is such a great point, that we tend to think about diversity in terms of gender, ethnicity, race, but diversity is so much more complex than that. And
right.
Is so much opportunity to learn from each other. And I think what I'm kind of taking away from this conversation is the benefit and the need for curiosity and learning when you are not somebody who comes to your role, to your company, to the situation with those traditional credentials. But even so, even if you do, to not have so much confidence and such a position of expertise that you can't learn from the people around you, that you're not flexible and open.
Exactly. You're not willing to learn, right?
Exactly.
I feel like sometimes, I'm amazed by my interns or somebody that's junior to me, because they have such a different way of thinking about things, and sometimes they surprise me. That's amazing, right? So I think just being open, and being okay with who you are actually helps us, right? Because we're not, we don't have this mindset of, okay, things have to be this way, or this is how we do things. I think if we're just open, if we're open to exploring new things, it's always great.
Yeah, and that rigidity of thinking actually reflects some degree of insecurity and lack of confidence, right? Because if you don't feel like it's safe, there to be another way of doing things, right?
Right.
Your approach or understanding, your experience is so fragile that if someone else comes along with a new way of doing things that's perceived as a threat, right? So there's actually a lot of confidence that comes with that willingness to be open to other people's ideas, to admit that maybe I don't have all of the perfect answers.
Right.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. I really, really appreciate it. I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody, which is, if imposter syndrome were not an issue for you and you had 100% confidence 100% of the time, what would be different for you? Is there anything that you would or would not do?
Let me think about it. I think earlier in my professional life, I think I probably wasted a little bit of time just overthinking things, overanalyzing things, and that I think was not a waste of time, but I wish I wish I didn't, right? And I think for that, I kind of wish we had these conversations or these topics out in the open, earlier enough, right? So that you knew what you faced wasn't just you, but it was, a normal thing for men and women, right? Or for people that are, just starting out versus more senior people. But in terms of a benefit, like we talked about, I'm also grateful that it's taught me a lot of humility, right? It's also given me that perspective that I don't know it all, and I'm completely fine with it, and I'm always willing to learn.
I love that. I think that is a great summary of your message today, which is that humility is so important, and we don't want to have 100% confidence 100% of the time, right? But to balance that with that tendency to overthink, to get stuck in our own heads, to make sure that we're focusing on doing less of that internally and maybe externalizing that a bit through getting support from others, being curious, asking questions, so that we don't get stuck in that cycle of overanalyzing.
Right.
So what motivated you to want to tell your story today? What is it that you're hoping people will take away from this?
I think imposter syndrome is something that, we all feel it, but we're ashamed to talk about it. We're worried to admit it, right? I think as women especially, we think it's one more thing, where we're admitting that we're weaker or more sensitive or blah, 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 right? But I think it's, high time we have honest conversations around it and really discuss it, right? I think unless we deal with things head on and we have them out in the open, we don't really learn from it. We don't really leverage it. So I'm hoping that more people, really discuss it and really move on from it.
Thank you so much for having the courage to come and tell your story today. That's certainly the goal of this conversation, is to encourage more people to share these things out loud, to get us to a place where we recognize there's nothing shameful about what we're feeling. It's part of the human experience. And the more that we put it out into the world, the more we can get support, the more we can normalize it, the more
exactly.
support each other, right? So I really appreciate your willingness to be here, to share your personal story with us. And I wish you all the best as you take a new turn in your career trajectory.
Thank you. Oh, I had a great time. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it with other women who can benefit from this conversation. Before we go, I want to share some additional resources with you. If you struggle with imposter syndrome and you want to manage it more effectively, I invite you to join my free Impostor Syndrome online challenge. Every day for 7 days, you'll get an email with self-reflection questions and exercises to help you better understand your own experience with imposter syndrome and how to navigate it more effectively. To join the free challenge, visit executivecareersuccess.com/imposter
impostor-syndrome-challenge. When you sign up, you'll immediately receive your first message. Also, if you're interested in joining a community of women who engage in candid conversations that generally aren't happening elsewhere, I invite you to join my Leading Women discussion group. On the first and third Thursday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern, we meet virtually over Zoom to talk about questions or challenges related to career management, leadership development, and any other relevant topics such as imposter syndrome and confidence. It's always a great discussion with a great group of women. If you want to check it out, you're welcome to be my guest on a future call. Just reach out to me at kim@executivecareersuccess.com and I will share the call details with you. And if you want to join my newsletter to receive tips, insights, and updates, text Leading Women, all one word, to 66866. Finally, consider telling us your story. Contact me to learn more about how you can be a guest on the Impostor Syndrome Files. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.